So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to mix multiple references and how to use them to illustrate a unique animal character like this. During this video, I'm using my normal beginner-friendly workflow, and along the way, I'll also share some illustration tricks that I use to tackle some of the challenges with this character in particular. As usual, I think you can follow this process with any brushes you want, but I'll list mine in the description below. So as you can see, I've sort of already got an outline of my character placed in here, and you can download this exact outline for free in the description, but I also wanted to teach you really quickly how you can make these. First, you'll need to find some kind of reference images to work from. So since I'm making an animal character, I'm just going to combine this reference from a fashion catalog, along with an illustration from a rabbit that I really like. After that, I'll do my best to use those references to make a pretty rough sketch like this. Next, I'll usually color in my sketch, and this is also a good time where you can kind of experiment with different color combinations, but usually I'm just pulling my colors from the references. And once everything's colored in, I usually use the warp and liquefy tool to sort of balance and refine the sketch. I'm okay with sketching, but I usually kind of mess up the proportions. So this is the step where I'll kind of stretch or shrink the arms and legs, even resize the head, just kind of mess with everything until it looks right. And finally, once this concept's finished, I'm just going to trace out a perfect outline on a layer above it. And there we go. I think this outline looks pretty good. And then to actually use this outline for illustration, I'm just going to turn off the concept, and I'll kind of keep this off to the side and use it as a reference. Then I'm going to move the outline layer above everything. I'll set the transparency for that to multiply. And then to paint here, I'm just going to make sure I'm working on a blank layer down here below everything. And I'll use my regular sort of 5-step illustration process for this character as well. And basically, the first thing we need to do is just block out all the colors for all the main elements in the character. And I think I'll start with the pants first. So I'll choose a kind of saturated khaki tone like this. And then for the brush, I'll use the medium quill. And I'm going to fill this in a little bit differently than I usually do because I want to give it more texture. So first, I'm going to fill out all the main segments here and then the outline. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to do all these kind of individual vertical brush strokes. And this is just going to give it a nice texture. And this looks pretty good, but you can see I definitely went way beyond the sketch. And I want to do my best to follow that as closely as possible. So to actually fix this, I recommend using the liquefy tool, set to push. And you can actually push and kind of pull everything you painted back in line with the sketch. Now in some areas that are a little bit tighter, like especially around the arms and the hands, I will use the eraser brush just to cut it back. And there we go. I think this kind of main wash looks pretty good. I would say maybe the texture is a little bit too strong, so it's optional, but you can soften it with the water blender. So to do that, I'm going to grab the background blender, and I'm going to use it at a medium size and a very light pressure, and I'm just going to randomly blend out some of these areas. Now, since this rabbit has white fur, we have a little bit of a challenge because we want to maintain contrast with the white background. So the way I recommend kind of managing that is to actually use a very light kind of warm gray tone like this. Then I'll make a separate layer, and I'll just outline all the furred areas using the annoying pen brush. And this kind of border thing around the white areas looks pretty good, but I think it may be too dark. So if you want to refine it, you can just temporarily turn off the outline, and then just use the hue, saturation, and brightness to kind of dial in the color and the shade. And then for this illustration, I think the last kind of element we need to fill in is just the hat. So I'll just roughly block that out using the medium quill brush. And then just like I did with the overalls, I'll correct it back to the sketch using the liquefy tool. And once the main colors are all blocked out like this, we can move on and do the major shading. And for this illustration, it's pretty simple. And I'll start with the overalls. So I'm going to make sure the overall layer is selected. And I'm going to do the shading using the freehand selection tool. And for example, just under the arm here, I can just select that area, hue, saturation, and brightness, and then I'll darken it a little bit, and I'm going to shift the hue a little bit towards purple. And then down here on the legs, I recommend doing a soft shadow on the right side of each one. So I'll just select both of those areas. Then I'll feather it out quite a bit. Hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'll darken it and shift the hue just like I did before. And I'll also add some shadows underneath the camera and also on the sides of the arms. After that, I'll do the shading on the hat, and it's pretty simple. I'm just going to make sure the top section of the hat is a little bit darker than the bill. And now for the last of the shading here, it's a little bit tricky. I actually want to add some shadows on the white rabbit's fur, just around the neck and then on the upper arms. So to do that, I'm going to use a different technique. I'm just going to make a blank layer that's just above the kind of outlines I made for the white fur. I'll choose a warm gray tone. And I'm just going to paint them on using the Shoto brush. Now around the neck area, I'd like it to be a little bit smooth, like a kind of a smooth fade. So to get that effect, I'm going to use the fluffy water blender, and I'll just kind of smooth out the top edge. And of course the shadows on the fur are way too dark, so to kind of adjust them, I'll switch off the outline and just mess around with the hue, saturation, and brightness until they look right. And with the shading finished, we can move on and paint the face. And it's actually a lot simpler than it looks. So for the eyes, I'm just going to make a separate layer, and I'm just going to paint one eye. And I'm painting this almond shape using the fine liner pen. And then I'll scribble in the pupil just using the colored pencil brush. After that, I'll just copy the eye and mirror it over for the other one. For the nose, I'm using the fine liner pen. For the glasses, I'm using the kind of scratchy colored pencil brush. And then for the rosy cheeks, I'm just going to do like a random blob and then use the Gaussian blur effect to kind of smooth it out. And once all the major facial features are finished like this, at this point, they're still separated onto their own individual layers. So I like to go in there with the arrow tool and just kind of juggle things around and mess around with the position and see if I can make the face look a little bit more refined. And in this case, it looks a lot better, but I can't quite get the eyes right. So what I like to do is use the liquify tool just to kind of mess with the kind of position of the pupil, and sometimes I can fix it like that. And once I'm happy with how everything looks on the face, I'm going to merge all those features together onto one layer. After that, we can move on to step 4, which is basically just filling in all the remaining small details. And I'm going to make sure I paint all these details on a few layers that are pretty much above everything so far. And these details are pretty self-explanatory, but I do want to kind of focus on the camera just for a minute, just because it has a few extra steps. So for that, I'm going to make sure the outline is back on, and I'm going to start by using the fine liner pen and pure white just to block out a sort of background for the camera. After that, I'll use the Shoto brush and dark green just to kind of fill out the leather area. And then I'll use a lighter green color and the colored pencil brush to outline all the details. And then for the black lens, I'll use the Shoto brush again. And to make it more interesting, I'll draw some white reflections on it. And then for the camera strap, I'm going to make that on a separate layer. And I'm going to fill that in using a kind of an orange tone and then the fine liner pen. And the reason I did this is because I want to set the transparency of this to multiply, just so it has an interesting effect on everything that's below it. And on that note, I'm going to make another layer, this one below the camera strap, and I'm going to use the medium quill brush at a pretty small size to paint all the red kind of stripes on the shirt. And you can see here, it has a really nice effect when it layers with the camera strap. And since a lot of these stripes went too far, I'll cut them back with the eraser brush. After that, I'll quickly finish up the remaining details just using the fine liner pen, the colored pencil, and the Shoto brush. Now in this case, with the laces, since I kind of lose contrast where it overlaps with the pants, I recommend using the selection tool set to freehand. Just select that sort of invisible portion, and then raise the brightness to make it pure white. And that's just a trick to give contrast. And as a finishing touch, I'm going to use the colored pencil brush to add some stitching on the clothing. And there we go. I think these details look pretty good. Now, you might have noticed the camera color changed, just kind of as a spontaneous kind of last minute thing. I wanted to try and see what yellow looked like, and I think it looks a lot better. It could be because we have a lot of primary colors already on this character, and the yellow kind of balances it out. Now at this point, with pretty much everything finished, the last thing we need to do is just kind of balance and refine the overall illustration. And this is an optional step, but usually what I like to do is I'll just merge everything together onto one layer, and then I can use the arrow tool on the whole illustration and just kind of warp and distort it and just kind of refine the posture and the balance. And just like that, this character is finished. So I'm gonna go ahead and print this out, and I'm just using my $50 Pixma printer, and I mentioned this in a previous video. It seems like it works pretty well, especially because I can print onto the paper I want. So in this case, I'm using a somewhat warm-toned 200 GSM cold press watercolor paper. There's just something about this one that has a really nice feeling to it. As always, if you think I've earned it, please give this video a like, and if you want to learn more about how to print your Procreate artwork, I recommend watching this video next.